This is lecture 1, semantics, and we're going to, this is an outline of what this lecture will be about, so I'm not going to talk about that. It's more for you when you're looking at this. You may want to print out this slide and follow along. So we're going to get into part 1, which is the definition of meaning. And we're going to start right away with a little bit of definitions, because here with semantics we enter a field that many people don't even understand what it is. And often you hear people saying, well, that's semantics, meaning it's not important. In fact, semantics is the most important part of language, so it's kind of ironical that people use that expression. So semantics is the science of meaning. Okay, that is, we're looking at meaning, how words and other signs mean. Okay, so what is meaning? Okay, well, that's a very complicated question. And in fact, there's a book by Ogden and Richards that appeared in 1933 called The Meaning of Meaning, which is a very good book, and I recommend it if you're interested in reading more about it. So an entire book dedicated to trying to define what meaning is. Now, a simple and simplified and simplifying and oversimplifying definition is, well, meaning is a mental representation. That is, when I say the word dog, you're thinking of something, right? You think of a dog, right? And, you know, it's 4 legs, a tail, it goes woof woof, you know, that kind of thing, right? So that's your mental representation of the dog, and that's your meaning. Again, it's a simplified, simplistic definition, but it's okay. It will work at least as a first approximation, and some of the lecture will be precisely why this image isn't quite correct. Then people who are interested in semantics, and they're called semanticists, by the way, will distinguish between the mental representation and the referent. And the referent is the thing that it's a real thing in the real world that the word refers to. So if there were an actual dog here, I would say the referent of the word dog is that thing over there. Okay? So if I say the referent of bottle of water is this thing here, this object, this physical object that I actually hold in my hand. Okay? And the meaning is what you think of when I say bottle of water. Right? So far I've been talking about signs. Okay? And, you can think of a word as a sign, okay? But it can also be an arrow that's pointing in a direction, a no parking sign, pretty much anything that conveys meaning. It can be a picture, again, anything that conveys meaning is a sign, okay? And so we distinguish within the sign a signifier and a signified. Okay, so in other words, we're saying in order for something to be a sign, it has to have these two facets. Okay, you can think of it as the two sides of a coin. The signifier are the physical support of the sign. In the case of words in language, which is what we're interested in, it's the sounds or the letters printed on a page. But the sounds are more important. And the signified is the thing that is signified, and that is the meaning of the sign. So there is a famous picture that was in the book that the students of Ferdinand de Saussure published after his death. This has become extremely famous. It's one of the foundational texts of linguistics. And he has this representation as two halves. You have the concept of you have the sound, the signified, the signifier, and then the picture. In this case, the little image of the tree stands for the meaning of the tree, and arbor is Latin for tree, And you may ask, why is it in Latin? Because he could. There is no reason for it, but he's just saying the sounds of the word arbor are the signifier of that word in Latin. Okay, he picked Latin because he just wanted to pick Latin. There is no particular reason. Okay, so the idea is that you have a word like dog, you would have the sounds d, o, and g, and then the concept of dog is the thing that you think of when we say dog, right? And so you put these two things together and you get a sign. Now, the question then that you can ask yourself is there a good reason for the signifier and the signified to be paired together, right? I mean, this union of the two parts. Well, the answer to that is no, there isn't. And this is a fundamental principle of language. We call this arbitrariness of the sign, in the sense that there is no good reason, it's arbitrary, for a dog to be called a dog. Now, how do we know that? Well, think about it. In French, a dog is called chien. In Spanish, it's called perro. In other languages, it's called, in Latin, it's canis, right? So in other languages, it's different. Now, if there were a good reason for a dog to be called chien, then we would say chien too, because whatever good reason there would be in French, that good reason would be the same in English, and in Latin, and in Greek, and so on, right? So the fact that there is no good reason is exemplified by the fact that the word for dog is different in every language. And so because of this, we come to the conclusion that there is no necessary relationship. Okay? Now, another way of looking, and this is just a different way of looking, it's the same idea, at the sign, is that you have a signifier, the signified, the meaning that we've talked, and the sign is the union between these two disparate things, and then you have a referent, right? That's the object in the world, right? Now notice that you cannot go from the signifier, the sounds, to the referent. There is no connection there. However, you can go from the signifier to the referent by going through the signified, because the signified refers to the referent. Okay? So in a sense, this explains the mystery of why, by producing some sounds, I can identify an object in the real world. So by producing the sounds the, o, and g in that sequence, you can go and pick out the dog. If I say bring in the dog and not the cat, right? And then you would bring in the right object in the world. Okay, so that's that's what we're talking about here. That is, how is it possible that we can use sounds to pick out, to identify actual object in the real world? Well, it's through this connection. The sign provides the connection between the real world referent and the sounds. Okay? So far, so good. Things get a little bit more complicated, as I said. So, the question that people wanted to deal with is, well, how do we know what the meaning of a word is, or what the meaning of a sentence is, right? And from this perspective, they started looking at all sorts of situations in which, well, let's say, meaning doesn't quite work as you would expect, okay? So, for example, you can have different descriptions of the same referent, right? So you can refer to something, like you can say Bob and my sister's cousin, assuming that your sister's cousin is named Bob, right? So you're referring to in two different ways to the same entity in the world. So in order to deal with this kind of problem, philosophers stepped in. And when philosophers step in, you're in trouble. Here it's a German philosopher, Gottlob Frege, one of the great logicians in history, and he introduced the distinction between sense and referent, okay, or Sinn and Bedeutung in German. And there you have a picture of the first page of the famous article that introduced that. If you can read German, go ahead. So this is basically the distinction that we just outlined a second ago. That is, the sense is the mental representation, in a sense, and the referent is the thing out there. The Bedeutung is the referent, the thing out there. Now, Frege introduced another concept that became enormously influential and also within linguistics, which is that once you're looking beyond a word like dog, right? That if you're looking at a sentence, then the meaning of the sentence has to do with whether the sentence is true or false. And more specifically, as Frege put it, the truth value. Okay? So what do we mean by this? Well, let's look at a sentence here. So I say, Superman can fly. Right? Now, assuming that Superman is real, okay? We're not going to go into fictional worlds, okay? But let's assume that it's real. Superman can fly. Is that true? Yes. Well, then the meaning of the sentence is true, okay? And so T would be how you would mark this. Now, I also then state Superman was bit by a radioactive spider. And is that true or false? If you don't know, look it up on Wikipedia. But no, it is not true. There was Spider-Man, of course, right? So then the truth value here would be false, right? And so Frege says, well, there you go. So that's how the two sentences have different meanings, right? Because one has a truth value of true, and the other one is false. Okay? Now, going back to the Sinn and Bedeutung thing, here I can say Superman is Clark Kent, right? Now, notice that this is true, and so there is no problem there. Why? Because they basically refer to the same person, but using different descriptions, so to speak, okay? And so, in other words, there are two senses, two sins, okay? One is Superman, the other one is Clark Kent, but one Bedeutung, one referent, and that's the person, that underlies those two people, yeah? Because it's the same person. They just puts on the glasses and takes off the outfit, okay? All right, so this idea that sentences, the meaning of sentences has to do with their truth value, as I said, became super influential. And particularly because it was worded in terms of propositions. And what that means is that, basically you have a sentence, right? And that sentence is taken to be the expression of a proposition, okay? And they're traditionally indicated as P, Q, etc., other in capital letters, right? So you would say something like, all men are mortal, that's P, right? And then Socrates is a man, Q, that's your proposition, right? These are two propositions, right? So then the idea is that the meaning of the sentence is the proposition, okay? And you don't really analyze it. You're just checking whether it's true or false, okay? So then if you combine this with another big idea within logic, which is the idea is that you can, by looking at sentences that you have and how they're connected to each other logically, you can then extract more sentences, right? And these are called implications and or inferences. And the syllogism, you may have even heard of this in logic, right? So all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore it follows that Socrates is mortal, right? This follows logically from the two premises. The conclusion follows from the two premises, right? That's called a syllogism. Now, it's way more complicated than this. There's many forms of syllogism. Not all of them are necessarily true, but we're not going to go there. In this case, it is necessarily true. From the fact that all men are mortal, that's proposition P, and that Socrates is a man, proposition Q, it follows that Socrates is mortal. And that could be your next proposition. Okay? So this idea then is that you could create a predicate calculus, right? Or propositional calculus, where by looking at the propositions and how they're logically organized, you can then derive new information. So people were very excited about this. And this is very closely related to inferences and entailments, but basically which boil down to saying things that follow logically from the meaning of the words, right? So if I say Mary is married, it follows that she's not married, okay? Because you can't be single and married at the same time, okay? And that little symbol that you have here, this symbol here is the symbol for entailment, okay? So that is the symbol that says Mary is married entails Mary is not single. So from Mary is married, you can infer that Mary is not single, and it follows logically and necessarily. Okay, so that's a very strong stance for logical semantics. Now, it gets way more complicated than this, and if you take a semantics class, we would go a lot deeper into it. But for the purposes of this class, this is where we stop. Feel free to thank us, Dr. Pickering in particular, for not going any deeper, because it gets more complicated. But let's look then very quickly at the pros and cons of the logical approaches to semantics. Well, first of all, it's formal, right? That is, we didn't look at the formalism because it's complicated, but you can write all of these representations with formulas that are very, very clear, and you can understand immediately whether it's correct or it's not correct, etc. As I said, they can be used to calculate inferences, and they're based on the idea of truth, which is very clear and straightforward and understandable, right? So people say, well, that's a good foundation for meaning. Now, here we need to be clear that all of these theories are based on a referential view of semantics, where the important thing is the referent. Okay? If you remember the picture that we showed at the beginning, with the sign on one side and the referent on the other side, truth-based theories of semantics are focused on the referent. That is, how are things in the world? All right? Now, the weakness is, well, first of all, they ignore the meaning of words, okay? That is basically beyond saying, well, the word dog refers to that object over there. They don't tell you, how do you know that? How do you identify the object over there? What are the characteristics? You don't know anything about that, except that it refers to something. And then, of course, because it only can analyze the truth of sentences, it's very bad at looking at parts of the meaning that don't depend on the truth. Okay? And you may say, well, wait, there's parts of the sentence that the meaning of sentences that don't depend from their truth? Absolutely. Okay? So look at this example. If I say dinner's ready and the chow is ready, right? The two sentences mean the same thing. That is, it's either true or false. If the food is ready to be eaten, then it's true. And if the food is still frozen in the freezer, then it's false. Right? So there is no circumstance where you can say, well, dinner isn't ready, the chow is ready. Right? I mean, the truth, they're the same thing. Okay? But what's the difference between dinner is ready and the chow is ready? Then the chow assumes that the food isn't very good. That is probably like cafeteria type food. This would be like, for example, in the military or in other institutional food, whereas dinner is going to be something that was prepared by, in a family. Okay? Now, and this can be used, jokingly, ironically, etc. But literally speaking, if you say the chow is ready, the assumption is that the food isn't very good. Okay? Whereas dinner is ready, there is no such assumption. So the meaning is slightly different, and we're going to talk about the different here. Okay? But the truth of the two statements is exactly the same. All right. So here we're going to pause.